All right. And so I think what we're going to do is we're going to go proximal to distal. So we have that folks want to go over the collateral circulation around the scapula, the posterior forearm muscles, and then a whole bunch of hand questions, which I'm going to refer back to the chat once we get to the hand, because I think it was like 3 different hand topics. So let's do those other 2 first, because they should be much quicker to deal with. And then, we'll go into the hand. All right. And I'm just going to pull up Dr. Lobo's slides as well as my own slides to refer back and forth between the two for pictures. So give me just one moment. Okay. All right, so collateral circulation around the axle. There we go. All right, so collateral circulation around the scapula. This is important because it's a way for blood to get to the upper limb in the event that there is some sort of blockage of the axillary artery. So you can see here how here's our axillary artery, and then they're showing you the arrows, like the arrows in this picture, and this is pulled from the more blue box. They're showing you with these arrows how the blood would get around this blockage in your axillary artery to still get to your upper limb. So this is an anterior view. Here's a posterior view back here. So you can see how you have your dorsal scapular artery, your suprascapular artery, and your circumflex scapular artery all participating in the blood supply to your scapula. They've shown with this little green tie here, if you had a ligature of the axillary artery, so literally they tied it off, how you would still get blood to the upper limb. So it would go through the collateral circulation of the scapula, and then it would go to the circumflex scapular artery, which, if you remember, is a branch off of subscapular artery, and subscapular artery is a branch off of the third part of the axillary artery. So this ligature here is in between the second and third part of your axillary artery. So the blood would re-enter the third part of your axillary artery via your subscapular artery here. So important things about the anastomosis around the scapula, you got to know what branches are participating. So you have your dorsal scapular artery, your suprascapular artery, your circumflex scapular artery, and these anastomotic branches of your intercostal arteries. I think I've also seen it as like transverse cervical, but don't worry about it. Since he listed like this picture with dorsal scapular artery in his slides, I would go with that as part of the anastomosis. So it's pretty helpful when it comes to the anastomosis around the scapula, because most of the blood vessels involved have scapular in the name. So dorsal scap, suprascap, subscap, circumflex scap. It's usually pretty helpful for that. So those are the major blood vessels that you need to know that are helping to feed this network of arteries around your scapula, and how you would get around a ligature of the axillary artery in between the second and third part is because of the anastomosis around the scapula, blood re-entering into the axillary artery via your suprascapular, excuse me, your subscapular artery. My bad, S's this morning. Okay, so that is the collateral circulation around the scapula. Before I move on to the next topic, I just want to make sure that the person who asked that question, do you feel good about the collateral circulation? Is there anything else specific you need me to answer? Like, does that clear up any lingering questions you had around it? Okay, good, great. So that was our first topic, was the collateral circulation around the scapula. The next one was posterior forearm muscles. Okay, so for posterior forearm muscles, where's Dr. So this is Dr. Lobo's slides. So there's a lot of them, and I'm guessing you want me to go through all of the muscles because there's a lot of muscles on the posterior forearm, or did you want me to go over this whole? So I guess the question is, can you be more specific about your question? The person who was asking about posterior forearm muscles. Did you want me to go through the 12 muscles, or did you want me to try and go through Dr. Lobo's PowerPoint that's titled posterior forearm? The muscles that flex the wrist. Okay, so okay, thank you for being more specific with that, because the muscles that flex the wrist are actually on the anterior forearm. So I think he put anterior forearm muscles in a slide deck labeled posterior forearm, but the muscles that actually flex at the wrist are anterior forearm muscles. So here, we're gonna go and we're gonna point these out. Okay. No, 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 no. Still too high up, still too high up, up, up. Okay, here we go. So muscles that flex the wrist, something that will help you with this is really thinking about the names of these muscles. So your flexors, a lot of them have flexor in the name, which is, convenient. And then when you see carpi, you should think of the carpal bones, your wrist bones. So you have flexor carpi radialis as well as flexor carpi ulnaris. So in their names, they're telling you, I am a flexor that flexes the carpal bones on the radial side of the wrist. And remember, radial is more lateral, versus flexor carpi ulnaris is I am a flexor of the carpal bones on the ulnar side. So that's more medial over here. So flexor carpi radialis and flexor carpi ulnaris are the two you're thinking about there. And there should be some good pictures here. You can also include in this palmaris longus, but I don't really think about palmaris longus in that manner. I usually just think about like flexor carpi radialis and flexor carpi ulnaris because they are specifically attaching on the carpal bones. Therefore, you're going to get flexion at the wrist. So let's see. Yep. So they even say here in this chart, your flexor carpi radialis and your flexor carpi ulnaris. Flexion and a.
I don't think you're sharing a screen right
Oh, I'm
now.
not? Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. Thank you for telling me that. Okay. What about now? Can you see it now?
Yes, now I can see it.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. So I'll just reiterate what I was just saying. So the two flexors at the wrists that I would think about are your flexor carpi radialis as well as your flexor carpi ulnaris. And you can see them here. So here's flexor carpi radialis inserting on the radial half of your carpal bones. And then your flexor carpi ulnaris inserting on the ulnar half of your carpal bones. And then in here in this particular drawing, you can see it even better where you have the insertion on the carpal bones, and the insertion on the carpal bones. Another picture, there we go. And then you can see here for like palmaris longus, its insertion is more on it's on the metacarpals of your third and fourth digit. So when I think about flexion at the wrist, I really think about flexor carpi radialis and flexor carpi ulnaris. Okay. So let's see. And then the muscles of flexoris, okay. Okay. So for the person who was asking about the posterior forearm lecture, were there any other questions that you had about that? Like any other muscles you needed me to clarify, or are you good? Okay. I think we're good for this person. Okay, awesome. So before I get to the hand stuff, I just got a question asking on Dr. Lobo's midterm study guide, know the tendons relate to either side of the radial artery at the wrist. May you elaborate on that, please? Okay, so I actually mentioned this on the video that I made for y'all. It's part of it, but I'll just go ahead and pull it up. So there's a video, and I made I review PowerPoint to go with it. Pretty much the review PowerPoint is the video is me going through the review PowerPoint, just like talking you through stuff. So if you see that video, it has a bunch of stuff on it that's mostly about Dr. Lobo's questions, but I did find this in more, which I think is the question this person was asking. So when you're feeling for the pulse at the wrist, when you're feeling for the radial pulse at the wrist, you would end up feeling lateral to the flexor carpi radialis tendon. I believe that's what his question was asking about. And I'm fairly certain I got that off of a more blue box. So I think that's what he meant by that. For the person who asked that question. Now, tendons really on either side of the radial artery at the wrist. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm not sure about the other side he was talking about, but in the more blue box, it definitely mentioned the flexor carpi radialis tendon. Unless he's talking about the radial artery when it's in the anatomical snuff box, but I don't think of that really as wrist. That's like the base of the thumb. Okay. So then there was a whole host of questions about the hand. Before I go on to the hand, because it's going to be a little bit of time, are there any other like smaller questions that I can answer before we like dive into the hand questions that were added before? I'll just give somebody a minute if they want to throw something in the chat. Otherwise, we'll get started on the hand. Oh, go ahead. Did somebody unmute? Nope. Okay. Well, I'm going to pull up hand PowerPoint. All right, so the different questions that were about the hand. Let's see. We had, what is the proximal transverse crease? So prox trans crease. And then common digital branch of median nerve. And then the difference between the motions of the hand. Okay. And then spaces of the hand. And let's see, are there any other hand questions? Nope, okay. All right, so for some of this stuff, okay, I think some of these I have in one of my review PowerPoints, like I randomly found it, because I don't think some of this is in Dr. Austin's slides. Maybe like the nerve one, but hold on. Let me find stuff. Okay, so I found one of the answers to those questions. So the first one, somebody was asking about the common digital branch of median nerve. So you can see here, here's your common palmar digital nerves coming off of median. So median is in the purple in this picture. So your common palmar digital branches, and most likely, like, they're probably going to the lumbricals. Yeah, branches to first and second lumbricals, and then common palmar and digital. Yeah, it looks like they're going up to innervate the lumbricals and then proper palmar digital nerves. And they just like name them depending on the area that they are in the hand. So it's all an extension of the same nerve branches, but they change name depending on where they are in the hand.
One thing Dr. Austin said that helped me with common and proper, she was saying every time you see a common, you know that it's going to divide into two. So when she was talking about, you can see in her office hours from, I believe, last week, she said when you're looking at the common palmar digital nerves, you know it's going to split into two and it's going to become a proper person, if that makes sense. So you go from a commoner to a proper person.
I mean, that makes sense
I don't
because
know if that.
depending on how they have it in the blood vessels too, like the blood vessels for the hand. So it makes sense. It's that whole, like, if you have a longus, there's probably going to be a brevis. If you have a superior, it's probably going to be an inferior. If you have an anterior, there's probably going to be a posterior. So I guess she's making the analogy, if you have a common, that there's probably going to be a proper as well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so are we good with that particular question about median nerve branches?
Quick question. Can you kind of go over, like, with thumb motions, which
That was going to
motions
be
are
next.
innervated by the median and which parts are innervated by the radial nerves?
Sure, that was going to be next. I just want to make sure that we're good with like these median nerve branches before we do that, before we move on, because hand motions was going to be next. So are there any question about these branches off of median nerve and understanding like common versus proper before we go to hand motions? Okay, hearing none, seeing none, we will move on to hand motions. Okay, hold on, I have it, there it is. Okay, well, technically these are motions of the thumb. But with hand motions, so with the thumb, it can go in almost 360 degrees. Adduction, abduction, extension, flexion, opposition, which is just touching the thumb to the tips of the fingers, as well as reposition, which is like the thumb getting back in line with the other fingers. So for movements of the hand can do flexion and extension. It can do abduction and adduction. And when we think of abduction and adduction, it also has the name, what is it? Radial versus ulnar. Drift is the wrong word, but basically it can move towards the radial side and it can move towards the ulnar side. So understanding what muscles do that, like what muscles do which. You'll have some that are in the hand, and then you'll have some that are in the anterior forearm. And you have to think about, is it moving the hand as a whole, or is it moving the fingers individually? So for movement of the thumb, a lot of the movement of the thumb is your thenar eminence, which is median nerve. You also have your flexor pollicis longus, which was in your anterior forearm muscles. It's also median nerve. However, adductor pollicis, so for adduction of the thumb, that is ulnar nerve because it's one of the intrinsic muscles of the hand that's innervated by ulnar nerve. When you have adduction or abduction of the fingers, that's from your pads and your dabs. So we know that our pads and our dabs are innervated by ulnar nerve. When it comes to, what is it, that flat, like, so the flattening out of the fingers, this is done by your lumbricals. And we know that the lumbricals, the first two are innervated by median nerve, but lumbricals 3 and 4 are innervated by ulnar nerve. So that's another thing that like have the difference between the two nerves. When it comes to flexion of the hand at the wrist, well, you know that flexor carpi radialis is innervated by median nerve, but flexor carpi ulnaris, it has ulnar in the name, so you know that's innervated by ulnar nerve. So when you're flexing your wrist, you're actually doing, like, you're using both of those nerves to make that motion happen. So let's see what else. Important muscles. And then like movement of like your pinky finger because of the hypothenar eminence. That's all ulnar nerve. When it comes to flexing your fingers, so you know the flexor digitorum superficialis is only median nerve versus flexor digitorum profundus, which does flexion at the very tips of your fingers. That's dually innervated, how you have median nerve on one half versus ulnar nerve on the other half. So knowing digits 2 and 3 versus digits 4 and 5. And I know it's a lot of little things for you to memorize, but unfortunately, like, these are things that they can ask you about. So just knowing, if you know the overall concept and then just adding in the exceptions, it makes it a lot easier. So that's why when I talk about innervation of the forearm, how it's mostly median except, so that you know if it's a forearm muscle and it's not a part of the except, that it's median nerve innervated. How the muscles in the hand are mostly innervated by ulnar nerve except, so you know if it's a muscle in the hand and it's not part of the except, then it's innervated by ulnar nerve. So a lot of this is just figuring out how can I get the most information packed into my brain and just try and like remember the little exceptions for those like 1 or 2 things that are going to be different. Trying to think if there's any other movements of the hands I can help you out with. But yeah, I think those are like most of the movements of the hand. So abduction, adduction of the fingers, almost all of the movements of the thumb except for adductor pollicis. The flattening out of the fingers, the flexion of the wrist. Oh, and then extension of the wrist. Extension is going to be your radial nerve because the extensors of the upper limb are radial nerve because it's the backside of the upper limb. Does that answer like what you were asking about when it comes to movement of the hand?
It does, but can you also go into the PIP versus the DIP joints?
Sure. So that's what we were talking about with like flexion at the fingertips. Here, let me see if I can find a picture. This is going to be anterior. So this is arm and forearm muscles. So you have to look at, yes. So superficialis versus profundus. Okay. All right, so when we're talking about flexion at the two joints, so you have your DIP, which is your distal interphalangeal joint, so the furthest out joint of your fingers here, versus you have your proximal interphalangeal joint, excuse me, which is right here. So the proximal is in between your proximal phalangeal bone and your middle phalangeal bone. So that's the proximal joint. Versus the distal is in between the middle and the distal bone. So the distal phalangeal. So this one here. So this is PIP, this is DIP. And you can see in this picture, like the muscles that insert in order to do these flexions. So when it comes to superficialis, the tendons for the muscle split and they insert on the middle phalangeal bones here. So they're going to be doing flexion at that proximal joint because they're pulling on this middle bone to bring it towards it. Because remember, our action is insertion pulling towards the origin. So you get flexion at the PIP from superficialis. So that's all median nerve. As opposed to, you can see because superficialis tendon has split in two, profundus has come underneath and its tendons insert all the way at the tips. So all the way at those distal phalangeal bones. Therefore, they're going to have flexion. They're going to do, their action is flexion at the DIP, at the distal interphalangeal joint. Now, recall that flexor digitorum profundus has dual innervation. You have the ulnar half that's innervated by ulnar nerve, and then you have the median half, which is innervated by median nerve. So your fourth and fifth digit, the flexion at the DIP is via ulnar nerve, versus your second and third digit, the flexion at the DIP is due to median nerve. So that's one of those like exceptions because you have one half of the muscle innervated by ulnar nerve, the other half of the muscle innervated by median nerve. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
What can you go over extension at those joints too? Is it similar?
It's all radial nerve. If it's extension in the upper limb, it's radial nerve because there's extensor digitorum. There's also extensor indicus. Like they're all radial nerve though. Let me see if I can find a picture of the muscles. That will be in this one, but it'll be posterior forearm. Okay. Okay. I don't like animations too much. Arm and forearm muscles. Posterior forearm. There we go. Okay. So extension for the upper limb is just all radial nerve. Because remember, radial nerve is innervating all of the muscles on the posterior upper limb, from your triceps all the way down to the 12 muscles in your posterior forearm. So when it comes to extension of like your digits, it's just all radial nerve. So you have your extensor carpi radialis longus and brevis, as well as extensor carpi ulnaris are doing extension at the wrist, versus your extensor digitorum is going out to digits 2 through 5. And then you have extensor digiti minimi, which is specifically an extensor for like your little finger. But yeah, you have this flat digitorum muscle for these four. And then you have extensor digiti minimi going out specifically to the little finger. And then you have the set of muscles that are specifically for your thumb, like extensor pollicis brevis, extensor pollicis longus for extension. And then you also have extensor indicus, which is another muscle. This one is specifically for your index finger for digit number 2. But there isn't the whole like split innervation with extensors. The muscles on the posterior upper limb is just all radial nerve. Radial nerve does a lot, but it's all on the posterior aspect of your upper limb. So all these muscles, triceps, all these, that's all radial nerve. Now, I think I mentioned before how it depends on how specific your professors want to get, but radial nerve does have branches. So they can specifically ask you, is it radial nerve? Is it deep radial? Is it posterior interosseous nerve? And then I threw in this chart from more if they want to get specific as to what branch of radial nerve is innervating what muscles. The suggestion that I made when trying to remember these was that your posterior interosseous nerve, which the way, like the flow of it that goes is it's radial nerve, and then you have deep branch, and then you have posterior interosseous. The way that I suggest you try and chunk this information is that posterior interosseous nerve is innervating the 3 muscles whose tendons make up the anatomical snuff box, plus extender indicus. So posterior interosseous has those 4 muscles that it's innervating. And then the 2 muscles that are just radial nerve, not deep branch, not posterior interosseous, is your extensor carpi radialis longus. And then, okay, thing is blocking me. Let me see. It won't. Okay, I don't know why the header for Zoom will not let me see the top of this, but there's like one more muscle up there that I cannot read because the header of Zoom is blocking it. But this one up here, that literally will not let me see. There we go. So brachioradialis, there we go. So brachioradialis and extensor carpi radialis longus are the only 2 that are innervated by radial nerve. That's not like some sort of branch of radial nerve. If you can chunk those 2 bits of information, then you know that the other 5 muscles that are in this posterior aspect of the forearm are innervated by deep branch of radial nerve. I'm not saying they're going to be this specific with your test. I'm saying that they could be, and I don't know if they're going to be this specific with your test. So I just want to warn you that they could. So this is in my, first off, this is a chart from Moore, and I threw this in my arm and forearm muscles review PowerPoint for y'all. That like literally this is what we're looking at right now. So I would suggest you just kind of throw this in the back of your head just in case, because I don't know what they're going to ask y'all.
She's asked practice questions and her answer responses have been this specific.
Okay, well then you guys are going to want to memorize this. So. I know it sucks, but yeah, you guys can do it. We've all done it. I know it sucks, but you can do it. Okay. So, all right, so then we got a question about, and that was, okay, we did hand motions. All right, so now we just got a question about what about the lumbricals? Don't lumbricals help extend PIP and DIP and help? Yes, that's the whole flattening out. Yeah, that's the whole flattening out of the fingers when they were showing. I had that picture there. Hold on. This is on the hand PowerPoint. Because the whole point for the lumbricals in that particular, like for that action, is the whole flattening out of the fingers so you can get the full upstroke. Where are you? There we go. So this is like so the lumbricals are helping this to happen. So you get flexion of the MCPs and extension of the interphalangeal joints. And the whole point is that that's how you fully straighten out your fingers. So if you watch the Dr. Preddy video, he mentioned how the lumbricals are like your puppet muscles. And that's like, they're the puppet muscles because they get the fingers to flatten out like that. And they're doing it because they're manipulating the tendons that are here. Okay. Okay, cool. Is this picture in your hand PowerPoint? Yeah, so The hand PowerPoint I've referenced here, as well as the arm and forearm muscles. So the hand one is going to be all the stuff with like the lumbricals and the nerves and the muscles that we've looked at that are specifically in the hand. When we were looking at forearm muscles, that's in the arm and forearm muscles, like review PowerPoint. I think that's like number 3 or something like that. Yeah, that one's number 3 versus hand is number 5. No, there's not a number 4. Okay. So some other questions that came up that I'm just gonna be honest, I've only vaguely seen these in passing. So the proximal transverse crease of the wrist, I think that's just something that if you look at, and don't quote me on this because I don't recall this coming up as like a test thing or anything like that. But if you just look at your wrist, you can see how there's a proximal crease and there's a distal crease there. I forget what they're in reference to. It might have something to do with the carpal bones, but I don't know. I think I randomly saw that when I was skimming through more or Grey's Anatomy. I honestly don't know though. So I can't with full certainty answer that question without doing some research in more or Grey's Anatomy. But I think that's what you're talking about. What specifically did you want to know about the proximal crease? And maybe I can find it real quickly for you.
There was just a question on one of her block review questions where it goes, bleeding from the superficial cut in the middle of the palm of the hand near the proximal transverse crease comes mainly from what vessel? And she didn't really talk about exactly where the proximal transverse crease was. So that's why I was asking.
Oh, yeah. So if you actually look at your wrist, you can see the 2 creases there. Like you can see the proximal and you can see the distal. Like it's just kind of like there. Just like how you can see the lines in your hands from like the creases in your hands from movement, you can see the lines in your wrists. I suppose like when she's asking about like the blood supply that would be there, I'm assuming, don't quote me on this, but I'm assuming this would be like the palmar carpal arches. Let me see if I can find a picture. Because like it does not come up very often. Like I'm trying to think if I've ever heard a question about that. Actually, while I'm doing this, I might as well just bring up one of the books. Gray's or Moore. I think she likes Moore better than Gray's. Transverse. And of course, you are as slow as molasses because PDF. All right, well, my Moore textbook is going very slowly, but it's looking for it right now. Here we go. The transverse crease deepens. Okay. All right, well, I at least found a picture to show you. If it will actually like position of the pisiform bone. Yeah. But actually label it. So palmar creases, transverse and longitudinal. Okay, yeah, found a picture. So here's your transverse creases that I was trying to say, like, you can just look at your wrist and sort of see them. I think this is the proximal and then this is the distal. And obviously this is the tendon of a palmaris longus of a person who is really fit. But since this is the location of like your pisiform bone right here, if she said it's in the middle, I'm still thinking it's probably the palmar carpal arch. That'd be like the blood vessel that's closest here. Let's see. Hold on. Here we go. Deep palmar arch, superficial palmar arch, blah, 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 blah. Palmar creases, transverse longitudinal, deepen when the thumb is opposed. The transverse crease deepen when the metacarpal phalangeal joints are flexed. So the transverse palmar crease commences on the lateral border of the palm, superficial to the head of the second metacarpal, extends medially and slightly proximally across the palm, superficial to the bodies of the third to fifth metacarpals. Transverse palmar crease. Yeah, I don't know if any of this is helpful. It is a random question. Oh, there you go. Proximal wrist crease, distal wrist crease. So it's actually labeled on a picture. And then if they're there, so if it's at the center, I still am going with it being the palmar carpal arches, the blood that would come from it, because this is your carpal bones. This is where the creases are. But like I said, I can't be 100% sure because I haven't heard that question before, so. Okay, and that was just, it was superficial palmar arch. Oh, okay. That's so like random, but okay. And then somebody was asking about the spaces of the hand. Like, can you go over the extensor expansion or what that means? I honestly don't know. Okay, so back up. Somebody was asking about the spaces of the hand. Was this in a PowerPoint or was this in questions that she sent y'all?
Kind of both. I asked that one too, just because she keeps talking about bursas or like which tendons are in which compartment. So I was just wondering if you can kind of overview what's in each compartment.
So does she actually want you to know about the bursa that's on like the posterior aspect of the hand, like on the dorsal side?
Like she'll ask questions about if you got something cut at a joint, and then they kind of expect us to know what bursas surround those tendons.
Okay, but is it on the anterior or on the posterior side of the hand?
I'm not sure. Someone said they think it's just the. Oh wait, never mind. I think they're talking about the. I'm not entirely sure, honestly.
Okay. Okay.
No, that was me. I don't think we ever talked about the dorsal bursas. I only think we discussed the palm, so the radial and the ulnar, and then like would they meet in the middle at the intermediate. I don't, unless I wasn't paying attention in class, but I don't think we ever discussed the dorsal bursa.
Okay. Well, I can go over those. Like those two are thankfully not that complicated.
And then,
Go
go ahead.
ahead.
I was saying she also hits the carpal tunnel pretty hard too.
Okay. Well, then let's talk about those two bursa, and we'll talk about the carpal tunnel. Okay. So when it comes to the radial and the ulnar bursa, so this picture is from Nutter. These two are from Grey's Anatomy, but you can see pretty well in both of them how you have this one bursa here that's surrounding the tendons in the carpal tunnel versus this one bursa here that's surrounding the solitary tendon in the carpal tunnel. If you look down at this Nutter plate, this is like the usual arrangement of bursa in the hand, how you have this one large bursa. This is your ulnar bursa, because remember when we talk about ulnar, it's more medial, and like if it's your fifth digit, that's medial. So you can see here how you have the ulnar bursa, And then this solitary one is your radial bursa because it's more lateral. So this is most people.
Question about this. Is the common flexor sheath like another name for the ulnar bursa?
Yes.
Okay.
Versus there's this variation here that I know has come up in at least one question before, where some people have it where they have an ulnar bursa, a radial bursa, as well as an intermediate bursa, and they all communicate with each other. And I know that there is some question where like a person gets, I think, bit on their little finger, and the infection spreads from their little finger to their thumb. And it spreads because of the communication between these bursa, because they have an intermediate bursa that is like communicating between ulnar and radial bursa.
I have a quick question. This might have been on the quiz, I don't remember, but there was a problem that I read somewhere that they got bit on the pinky. Where would you find the infection? And so would that be in the radial bursa, or would I find it in the, or I'm sorry, would that be in the ulnar bursa, or would I find it in the radial because of the intermediate bursa and the common variation?
So never assume. In a question like that, they haven't told you that the infection has spread. So you would go with, if they got bit on the pinky finger, we know that most people just have this ulnar bursa, also known as the common flexor sheath. So it would be in there. You can't assume that they have this unless they tell you the infection spread from the pinky finger to the thumb. How did it happen? If they just say the person got bit here, where would they find the infection? The answer would be that common flexor sheath, also known as the ulnar bursa.
Okay, awesome. Thank
Yeah,
you so much.
sure, not a problem.
Hey, Kristen.
Mhm.
So, Dr. Austin, on a practice quiz that she gave us yesterday, she asked a question about the extensor sheaths, but I don't recall her going over that much in class. Do you have a plate that could like explain that well?
I have a picture somewhere. It's either in this PowerPoint or it's in the posterior arm, or it's in the arm and forearm. Let me check. Because yeah, I hate that particular sheath because first off, nobody really pays attention to it that much, but also like it's so complicated. There's so much stuff running through it. But yeah, I know I have it somewhere. Just give me a second, I'll find it for you.
Thanks.
Sure. I really hope they don't ask you questions about it because it is like a lot of tendons going through. Oh, it is. So these are the ones that are on the dorsal aspect of the hand, and there's like 6 of them. Like, so it seems really mean to do this to y'all. Because we didn't get asked about these. But you can see how they're showing you like, here's the radial bone, excuse me, here's your radius and here's your ulna, and how there's 6 different like bursa with tendons going through them. This picture is if you took a cross section right here, and they literally have numbered them 1 through 6. So going lateral to medial, and how like all the different tendons are going through all of them. I really, really hope that they are not going to ask you a question about this because it's just so much. Okay. Because yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, there was a question that wanted us to know that the indices and extensor digitorum are in the same like synovial sheath.
Yeah, that was the question.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Well,
And that like digital means alone. But yeah, I don't think she went over it in class, but she asked us about it yesterday.
okay, then yeah, this is the picture that you would want to look at then and try and know that. So it's showing you here. So I will say it is the biggest one. So that's the only bright side of this, but you can see how tendon sheath for extensor digitorum and extensor indicus. So extensor digitorum, remember it goes to the 4 digits. versus indicus is just going to the index finger. So there's the 4 for extensor digitorum and then the 1 for extensor indicus. And this is like the biggest one that's back there. But there's like 6 different ones back here. That's just, I think it's the black and white pic in her slides. So which PowerPoint is this one in slide 16? Oh, so this is for her, it's her hand. This is my hand. This isn't my hand PowerPoint. This is my arm and forearm muscles, I believe. Or actually, no, this is my hand PowerPoint. Well, damn, sorry about that, guys. Yeah, this is my hand PowerPoint, which is like just after the carpal tunnel. It's just after the carpal tunnel slide. So yeah, this is, I'm sorry to put this on y'all, like right before the test, but this is the configuration that I guess she wants y'all to know now, or at least for that one question. The only thing that I can think about that would help you with this is that the way they are arranged, at least, makes a little bit of sense. So like, okay. So you have 2 pollicus, you have abductor pollicus and extensor abductor pollicus longus and extensor pollicus brevis all in this first one. And the second one, you have extensor carpi, radialis longus and brevis together. So at least they're chunked together. For 3, you have extensor pollicus longus, yeah, in here. So these 2, so for 1, you have 2 brevis. For 2, you have both of your extensor carpi radialis. For 3, it's by itself, just extensor pollicus longus. 4 has the most with extensor digitorum as well as extensor indicus, so like going out to the digits. 5 is extensor digiti minimi, and then 6 is extensor carpi ulnaris. So the only thing that's of any help really is that they are going in an order that is lateral to medial. That's about the only thing that's really helping you with this. Oh, this sucks. I'm sorry, guys. Hopefully there's only one question, and hopefully it's only that specific question that she gave you as practice questions, because often they'll pull from the practice questions for your test. I know that somebody asked about the carpal tunnel and going over it again. Since it is 11:54, this will be like the last thing that we do, because they can ask you a lot of questions about this. So yes, we'll go over like the contents of the carpal tunnel, the roof, the floor, and the tendons and the one nerve. Okay, so your carpal tunnel, you do need to know the roof, you do need to know the floor, you do need to know what's going through it. You can see how here, this is your flexor retinaculum. That's the roof of your carpal tunnel. It's also known as your transverse carpal ligament. The floor of your carpal tunnel is the carpal bones themselves. And in this cut, you can see here's your carpal bones, and then here's your flexor retinaculum. So going within the carpal tunnel, you have 9 tendons and 1 nerve. So the 9 tendons come from 3 different muscles. You have the flexor pollicus longus tendon over here by itself in its own bursa. Remember, the bursa that it's running through is the radial bursa because it's more lateral. So flexor pollicus longus going off to insert on the thumb. Here's your 1 nerve, the median nerve, and you can see how it's close to the roof of that flexor retinaculum. So it makes sense that you would end up with like irritation, inflammation, compression injury because it's right by the roof. And then here are the other 8 tendons that you have to know their arrangement going through the carpal tunnel. You can actually see in this picture how they've drawn in the bursa that are surrounding it. That's our ulnar bursa, also known as the common flexor sheath. And so your flexor digitorum profundus, its tendons go in flat and deep in the carpal tunnel, versus your flexor digitorum superficialis, its tendons are stacked. You got to remember it's 34/25. So this arrangement right here helped me when I was remembering how are the tendons inside the carpal tunnel for superficialis, 34/25. So tendon for digit 3, tendon for digit 4, tendon for digit 2, tendon for digit 5. 34 of 25. Okay. So we have come to the end of our hour. I'm going to stop recording now.